quick trim on the bottom. You know, when we talked about plates, we talked about using the foam bats. So I wouldn't really recommend foam bats for jars and things like that, just because they don't have as low a center of gravity, and sometimes they can fly off a little bit easier. So you could do the traditional lug down method of that, similar to you would with a bowl or a cup. I personally, this is a nice stiff leather hard. I prefer to just use a clean wheel head and just put a little bit of dampness on the rim. And I'm just going to tap the center and just give it a little firm press down. And the slight moisture of the metal wheel head and the slight moisture on the rim should allow this to stick without causing any problems. At least it does for me. But if you're not comfortable with that, you could just do lugs the same. You could try the foam. Just be really careful if you do. But really, trimming a jar or something like this is really not a whole lot different than a cup or a bowl or a plate. I know that this section up here at the top needs to go in a little bit. I can take a little bit out of this inside ring. I don't know that I'm going to. I probably will, actually, since it needs to be done. And some of this can be removed in this section as well to help, again, kind of find that curve a little bit better. Again, your form, the weight of your piece, how much clay is left in the bottom, all these things should dictate trimming. They don't need to be trimmed, but if the form dictates it, or if the amount of clay left over dictates it, then you definitely should. Again, I want to make sure I clean this up like trimming anything. The less water I can add to it, the better. And the last thing I'm going to do is just bevel this foot. Just again to try and, like I talked about with the plates, try and minimize the size of that foot ring. Alright, so even though I didn't use any water on this, I still want to let this set up a little bit before I start trimming the lids. So let's give this a few more minutes, and we'll be back. I'm ready to start trimming some of my lids. So again, like I said with the trimming of the bottom, I'm just going to use a little moisture on the piece to let suction keep this down. So I want to make sure that my jar is nice and centered. And so more than anything, I want to make sure that this inside of the gallery is centered. I'm not worried about the waviness that might be happening out here. I'm worried about this part in here because that's where the lid's going to sit. So right about now, you might be asking yourself, Adam, why do we have to trim these on the jar? Why can't I just trim this on the wheel head? So this is pretty small, right? So lugging this down is going to cover up a lot of it, and it could also ruin the edge of this. Or using a foam bath, it's going to be so small. If you've made any really small plates, you're going to know that it's going to come off pretty easily. So the best way to trim anything is inside of a chuck, because we know that it won't move. And that's what we have here. We've got a little bit of shake to it. A little bit of shake's okay. You know, the body of this is still a little bit wetter than the lid, so maybe that'll shrink down a little bit more. A little bit of wiggle inside of here isn't bad, just because if you think about how things shrink and expand. But if we have big, or if it's really tight, we want to address that or make new parts. So one thing we have to think about with this style of lid, where I'm going to trim this all the way smooth, is that I have to attach a lid. One thing I have to think about though is if I attach a knob, I'm not going to be able to pick it up by the knob because the knob's going to be too wet. And there's nothing down here I'm going to be able to pick up. So I'm going to use this piece of paper towel as like a little sling. And so now I can pick it up like this once I'm finished. So like with any trimming, we're trying to make the inside of this reflect, or the outside reflect the inside of our shape. And the nice thing about using a chuck is I can pick this up and put it down and not have to worry about centering it. Whereas if I was using lugs, again, I'd have to recenter every time. But the niceness of a chuck is that it's all ready to go. So let's see how we're doing. So again, we can start here and feel that thickness that we can see, and just kind of slide down and feel that. So if you can see, I'm a little flat inside of here. I've still got a bit of a point right there, so I'm going to trim this just a little bit more. And it's going to be done for right now. Press all these trim scars down because that looks terrible to leave those. And again, I need to put a knob on this. I made those knobs earlier, but I need to let this dry since I just trimmed it. So I'm going to set this to the side, give it a second to dry. Alright, this is that one that I trimmed thicker so that I can trim a knob out of it. This one's kind of shrunk considerably more, so I'm most likely not going to use this one for the final product, but I do want to show the technique. So there's a lot of extra clay here. If we look at the inside of this, it's kind of, again, almost like a shallow dish, which is nice because it gives me a lot of experimentation with a knob. I think you can kind of leave as much, take as much, whatever kind of fits the form. And right now this kind of bubble matches some of this bubble, and then this flatness kind of matches some of this flatness and that flatness in the foot. So that's kind of nice. I kind of like this. Let's see. So I'm going to take a little bit more off the lid. So if you can see up here on the top, there's some just kind of air bubbly stuff, wire stuff. So I can just trim this down a little bit. I don't want to take too much of the hide off. In fact, I'm going to dish it in a little bit. One, to just kind of remove excess, and two, just because flat never looks very good. You know, why would the top of this be flat if nothing else is flat? I guess you could argue the bottom's flat, but that's not very interesting. So by trimming this down, I'm going to lighten it, but I still have the height up here on the edge. So I think that's nice. Like I mentioned, this one's a little bit too small. You can see it keeps kind of getting off center. It's kind of a shame. I kind of like it. But I could probably make a knob like that for the other one too. Or I might like the other lid better. Again, it's about setting yourself up with options. This is the drop-in style. I'm not going to use the sling with this one because my knob is already leather hard, so I can pick it up and I'm most likely not going to ruin it. So the goal of this one, well, that actually fits in there pretty well. So again, we have a little bit of shake, not too bad. So the goal of this one is to get it to sit down like that. And again, seeing the profile here on the camera, I kind of like that too. But before we get too far, you know, the bottom of this doesn't look very good at all. Hopefully you can understand that. And so I'm just going to clean this up. And so again, you know, I'm thinking about the thickness of the wall here and the thickness down here. You know, right now this is pretty thick down here in the bottom, but the side feels pretty good. Again, because I have this knob in there, I'm going to take a little bit of clay on the inside out. Just because it gets thick down in there where that knob is. You know, like anything in ceramics, especially vessel making, you know, making things approachable, not too heavy, is important. And we're not here to make doorstops. Alright, so that feels better. Maybe just a hair more. That's kind of fun looking too. So I didn't do this on the other one with the thicker knob. Again, knowing that it's a little too narrow, I'm almost certain I'm not going to use it. But if I were to, I'd want to take a needle tool and poke it straight up into the center where that knob, gets thicker. And I'm just going to poke until it hits my finger and then just pull back out. And on the outside, I'm just going to go ahead and smooth that down. But down here, I'm going to leave that open, and that is going to help vent moisture out so that it can dry a little bit more evenly. So it's going to come in with my wooden knife and kind of add a little bit of detailing down in here. You probably can't even see this. But let me get a different tool. And I'll show you here in a second. So basically I just went in and trimmed inside of here, made that kind of separation right in there, kind of nice. So now this guy's done. So I'm back with my first one, which means I need my sling. So here's one of those ones that I threw earlier. This is that kind of hollow one. So let me dry this for a second. Since this is the one that I threw hollow, I'm going to go ahead and cut the inside out. So I'm just reaching in to compress that top since I wasn't able to from the other side. So again, at this point I could cut this down, cut it taller, or I'm sorry, cut it shorter if we didn't like the height of it. But I think I'll leave this. I kind of like that. And so, first thing I'm going to want to do is try and center it. And then put a little ring on with my needle tool. Good. And I need a scoring tool. I'm just going to score around that line. Score the foot ring of this knob. Place that on. See how it looks. Looks pretty good. And kind of wiggle it in place. And I'm going to pick this up real quick and really kind of push this on and support from the inside. So that I'm pushing from the inside of the lid and from the outside. Because there's nothing worse than going to pick up a lid and having the knob fall off. Talk about embarrassing. So I'm just going to, with my finger, just a little bit moist, add a little bit of compression. And compress that really well. And at this point, I can also trim this a little bit more. if I want a little bit more of a separation between the knob and the jar visually. This one's a little sticky, so it's not going to participate very well. Okay. It's not the best of the three lids, but it's a lid. So at this point now, I can basically just kind of pick whichever one I like. I might as well keep them all and bisque them all. But as you know, we've talked about with lids before, maybe. We want to make sure that all the way through all the firing processes and the drying processes that these are fired together. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and grab a different one because this one isn't my favorite. So that my lid doesn't stick in the drying process, I'm going to just put a nice layer of cornstarch inside of my gallery. It's just too. So I'm going to go ahead and use this one. And again, I'm going to dry and fire, at least bisque fire all of these lids just in case something happens to that one.